What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Jack Ramsays. It's a special road trip edition, joined by Trailblazers beat reporter, all-around good guy. You guys know him. Casey Holdahl is kind enough to join us from his Orlando hotel room, the swanky establishment. I've now come up with a name for this, Casey. You have your Texas two-step. Mm-hmm. I'm calling the Florida two-city trip the Florida Frog Hop.
Yeah, I could see that.
Does that work?
It is a quick hop from Miami to Orlando to Miami. It's about like a 30-minute flight. So yeah, I can see that. It is a quick one. Quite a bit of difference though this year between Miami and Orlando, just in weather-wise at least. It was semi-nice in Miami. It is cold here in Orlando. And then it's frigid in Charlotte where we finished off the trip. So we've been getting only cold trips this year too. Like, the last trip is we started in LA. That was obviously nice. Everywhere else was frigid, up to and including in New Orleans and Dallas, two places that are not usually all that cold.
You did avoid the snow though.
Not in Dallas.
That's true. Not in Dallas,
much, but like it did snow like in there, and we didn't get the New Orleans snow, which, I mean.
That's crazy.
If you're a team that's in New Orleans when it snows, the
Bucks are screwed. Like they're just like, nope. The city is not prepared for this. There is not a planet. They're like, yeah, no, we can fix this and get this going. You're stuck and socked in until then. So,
and New Orleans is not the kind of town where people are really out of their way to help you, anyways. So, They're going to be chilling for a minute.
Yeah. Now, I know in the past the Miami-Orlando or Orlando-Miami trip has definitely led with some players and personnel bringing some golf clubs and staying over next to the day and driving up or driving down, depending on where they're from, because sometimes the getting's good down in Florida in January.
Place we're staying at here is the first time we've ever stayed here, at least when I've been with the team, and it is on a golf course, but no one brought their clubs. So,
outside of Chris and Chauncey, are there any avid golfers?
I think a few of the other assistant coaches play.
Yeah.
As far as players, though,
it's a golf light team.
We might not have anyone else other than Chris. I'm guessing Donovan has probably swung them a few times, but I don't think anyone plays all that regularly. Ant's played a little bit. Ant
plays a little bit.
He's probably played a bit.
It's not a golf heavy team. It's definitely a change from the past.
No, well, and they're also it's such a young team too that like
they haven't picked it up
unless you had like a dad or uncle who played a lot of golf. Like when you're like 21, 22, 23, like you're not out there playing, so it makes some sense to me. But as the team gets older, we'll probably have a little.
That's actually one of the things I want to find out about Donovan, because he's such a ball is life guy. Like, what does he do outside of basketball?
It doesn't seem like much. Like he's one of those guys where you ask him like, what's your favorite music or movies? Like, I don't really watch movies. Well, what TV shows do you like? I don't really watch TV. Yeah. It's like, what music do you like? The Baby. And like so yeah, like he might not actually do a whole lot of those things.
To be fair, like to the basketball sicko point, like the man showed up at a remix game by himself earlier this season when he was rehabbing, and it was like, oh, he just loves hoop.
Yeah. So and he does. Like, that's that much is obvious because, also like he's a guy too. I mentioned this the other day. He just loves to play. Like, and he's one of those guys where it's like he just wants to play. You don't ever have to be worried about a guy like Donovan, being like, I don't really feel like going tonight. Like, if he can't play or if they're sitting him out, like he's hurt because otherwise that guy wants to be out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty clear. From when he tried to come back from when he hurt his knee, he definitely tried to force his way onto the court and passes the medical, stability test and gets out there and realizes, oh, I can't, gotta shut this down. But he's a guy who wants to get on the court. I think there's no other place to start this. We're going to do kind of a mailbag check-in, temperature check, whatever you want to call it of the team. They're just past the halfway point. The trade deadline's coming up. The All-Star break is just a matter of weeks away. Guys around the league that are setting their Cancun and Belize vacations. They can feel the sun just a few weeks away. There has been no bigger surprise, upswing, positive sign, growth, anything over the past 10 days in Scoot Henderson. I've got a bunch of different questions about him, but the thing that is you're around in practice and you're around the team all the time, what the hell is different? Because this was not something that looked like it was trending this way.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I think, from an offensive perspective, I think kind of the stuff that Chauncey mentioned the other day about kind of some of the mechanics that he's worked on and has improved upon, and cutting out some of the shots that, he's just not really geared to making at this point in time in his career. I think that's part of it. And obviously, then that helps open up the rest of his game. So, hitting shots, you know, I wouldn't say it's just that. I think that's obviously a big part of it. Why he's able to do that now, I'm not entirely sure. I do think that he's starting to understand the pace of the NBA a little bit more, at least in terms of kind of how to utilize his skills as a athletic young person who has speed, but also realizing that like sometimes like it just doesn't always work that way. Like you got to kind of mix things up and be a little more varied. I did actually talk to Scoot extended after the game in Miami. Actually, I need to go back and listen to the rest of it. I was going to use it for the podcast, but there was too much crosstalk in the locker room, and
no
I didn't feel as though I could put it out there. So I need to go back and listen to the rest of it because we did kind of get to some of these things. But about after 2 minutes into it, I was like,
there are things here that can't go out.
I can't use this, so I need to move on now. So like, and it's midnight or Miami time, so I'm like, I got to get through the work here.
It happens.
Yeah. So like, I don't have a great answer for it other than I also think there's just a part of Scoot that maybe recently has just been like, you know what, like I'm just gonna play. Like I think that he's a guy who's maybe been a little too concerned with kind of his own progress and maybe not feeling as if he's progressed as much as he feels like he should or could. And I feel like lately it's just been more like he's like, man, like I'm just gonna go out there and hoop. And I do feel like there's a certain element of like I just don't care anymore, like kind of how people are taking it, or
the specter of Victor Wembanyama it casts a long shadow.
Yeah, no, and I think there's that, and then I think you add in kind of the Dame piece too, and like I think it's easy enough to say that like I'm not worried about that or I'm not thinking about it, but
they hear it all, they see it all,
like, and especially when Scoot's 20,
yeah, he'll be 21 in 2 weeks,
yeah, a little under 2 weeks, so it's like I think about myself when I was 20.
Ooh.
And like, I mean, there's no way. Like, and granted, like, Scoot is much more of an adult than
he's been prepped for this, for sure.
But you are still 20.
Yeah.
And and if you're coming in and you're having some struggles and you just feel like maybe things aren't working the way you hope they would. Oh yeah, and by the way, the franchise guy is gone now and I play the same position as him and they drafted me and traded him. Like, I imagine that even if you don't get that put on you by people, and I really feel like people haven't, like, I don't feel like anyone's been like, you got to come in and be.
There are some people that feel like the organization did that to him, which I don't think the organization has done everything perfect, but I don't think that they
ain't done that. I can guarantee
they did not
that.
cast him as the Dame replacement. But I think some people have like, well, they drafted his replacement. It's like, well, no, they drafted the player that they thought was the best possible player.
At 3. Yeah.
Like
exactly.
if Scoot had gone 2, they would have taken Brandon. Like that's the reality of the situation. And I don't think those things are linked. And that's not.
No.
I'm not speaking for Casey, but like this isn't team speak. Like that's. The way that front office operates, they were drafting the best possible player regardless of what the situation was. Like that's
that wasn't like, oh, this opens things up so we can make trades now. It's like, no, they took the guy that they thought was the best guy at number 3. Like, and it happened to be a guy that played the same position. So I think all that together, and I just think having a stretch of health too. I think that's kind of one of the things we forget about Scoot is that he did last year. Like he was kind of
some dings
in and out, and like it never really got a chance to kind of get a good rhythm going. And then I just think that when you're also coming off the bench too, I just think that, and you've never done that before. I think and you're 20 years old. Like I just think that
you feel a certain way about that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so. while I couldn't necessarily like put a finger on like why he's been better as of late, it also strikes me as like this could very well just be a 20-year-old who is now midway through his second season in NBA after playing with the Ignite, which I think we all know, like, probably not the greatest situation.
It is what it is at this point. There. The documentary will be great.
So, so when you kind of look at it, I think in a lot of respects, it's like, this is just a guy who is talented, but, maybe started out, maybe a little behind the curve because of where he came from and the situation that he was kind of thrust into, and maybe the way that he thought about that situation or felt like there were pressures in that situation. And now I think he's getting to a point where it's just like, you know what, like, I can let that stuff go. And I think it takes a while to get there, the idea that like, I'm going to come into a new situation as a new pro, moving away from kind
the other side of the country.
Exactly. And I don't necessarily, I mean, like, he's obviously got a lot of family in town, but it's different. Like, you're traveling all the time. Like, you got practices, you got games, you got road trips, and then, you have some injuries, you don't end up playing at summer league. Like, I just think that like all of it together,
it's a lot.
You kind of understand, or at least you can develop at least a pretty good theory that it's really more just about like, he's just starting to kind of get comfortable now after X amount of time. And I also think too that like the way that Chauncey's talked lately about dealing with some of the young guys, and it kind of got posed more with Shaden, but I'm quite certain that probably some of those conversations, I don't know exactly what the topics are happening with Scoot as well. And I do feel like Chauncey is kind of just like, you know what, like, I'm just going to be as real with these guys as I possibly can, and I hope they take it well. If not...
Because that's transferred to Shaden Sharp, too.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I think that there's, from a coaching perspective, and really more than anything, just from the perspective of, like, yeah, this is a 20-year-old who is now kind of starting to figure out kind of how things work, how he fits in, where he can have success, maybe understanding some of his limitations and staying away from some of those areas. Whereas before, I think maybe he just kind of went headlong into it as like, oh, I'll figure it out, or like, I'll overcome that. And it's like, well, it's the NBA. You might not be able to overcome some of those things. So I think to me, it feels a little more, I don't even want to say organic, but it just feels like it's more like a progress that has been taking place and less like a like, oh yeah, Scoot kind of figured this out, or he did this. And again, like, shooting better helps, like
the big thing is the
like,
shooting. It's like
if you get shots to go down consistently, the rest of your game is going to look a lot better. And so I think, it's a little bit of everything with Scoot right now, I would say.
I think the thing is, it's interesting from my point of view is we were talking beforehand. It's like the shots going in, it's like, that comes and goes. That can go with literally any player. I watched Corey Brewer score 50. Like, you can have hot streaks. You can get the last two games. They've probably been, I don't want to say like the least impressive of like all of his games as far as like a box score, because the 2 games ago, 25-8 is nice. But those 2 games feel significantly more indicative of growth and understanding than getting 39.
Yeah.
Like 11-8 is not going to jump off the page to anybody. When I watch the game back against Miami, I'm sitting there watching a guy who understands where he needs to go with the ball, who he needs to get involved, when and where. And the decision making is so drastically different. Like I know I'm prone to having my fun with hyperbole. I can't think of a young player who went from like not making those decisions, like very rarely or very often, to making them regularly like that. It wasn't like a signs of this. Like he struggled before, just taking on Miami just a week ago. It was like those 2 players playing Miami was 9 days apart, are 2 totally different players.
Yeah,
and it's like, what is happening here? This is crazy. So I'm happy for him. I hope it's not like a 5-game thing. I think there's the shooting's nice, but I think the trend is more about things going up in the sense of the intrinsic how to be a point guard stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you talk about like 5 games. That's why, like, for me though, I've just been looking at January.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because we're to like 11 games now, and like his numbers through 11 games are more in January are more in tune with like what I would like to see out of
They're
him,
more
which is,
stable, certainly.
yeah, which is like, 15.3 points, 6.4 assists, 3.3 rebounds. Like those are the things for me where it's like, that's great. Like, I don't need 20
that's
points.
workable.
I mean, a double double would be cool, but like, I'm really more like, hey, if you're averaging mid-teens in points on a decent shooting percentage, if you're getting 6 or 7 assists per game, if you're grabbing a couple rebounds, you're getting a steal a game, that's great, man. Like that, we can work with that. Like that'll get there. And so for me, it's like I extrapolate it beyond like these last 5 games because like he does have like that bookend, the 39-point game. That's going to make everything look a little bit
for
better.
Sure.
Which is why I think he's been pretty good throughout the entire month, rather than just kind of like in those games where he was even getting starts. Like even coming off the bench, I feel like he's been doing a better job. So to me, it feels a little more like a sustainable baseline and less like he's having a really good run. But you're right, Dan. Like I hope it keeps up as well because it'd be great for him. It's great for the Blazers, and I think it just it just gives you a reason to be like, okay, like I can see it, like, and that's my whole point a lot about this season is like, give me something where it's like I can watch the game and be like, all right, like I get where we're going.
Yep.
Like it makes sense to me. Like if we're not there and it might take him a little bit longer than I would like, but like I can see it. And I think that's when people start to get really kind of, cantankerous about it is like when it's like, wait, what am I watching here? Like, and are we like, are we making progress right now? Because I don't know. Like
nobody wants to hear about the non-linear growth. You know what I mean? That's and that's the thing that's been so surprising about Scoot for me is that I don't want to kill a kid. It's his, first 90 games in the NBA were pretty subpar across the board, and it's just it is what it is. But to have this spike, it's not just like a little bit. Like if you look at like a 10-game rolling average for basically everything, it goes. Boom. Like everything just skyrockets. It's assist rate, turnover rate goes down, field goal percentage up, effective field goal percentage goes up, like efficiency, like every single thing is, and you're like, it's okay. So it's not just the ball going in the hoop. Yes, he's taking better care of the ball. He's making better decisions. Like the intrinsic stuff, the box score stuff, the defensive playmaking, like everything that you're tracking is all up. And even one of his biggest bugaboos, which is interior finishing, is way up. It's not just the three going. This is a guy who has hovered around like the 10th percentile for rim finishing among guards. Like it's rough. And instead he's shooting, I want to say he's like 70% in the paint in January. That's
in non-restricted area. Yeah. He's like 75, I think.
And that's the where that's coming from is all of a sudden he has a floater. He has a runner. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, that's the thing I want to see. Like, because he's not Ant, he's not Dame, he's not CJ, he's not a guy who's going to get up 10 threes a game. That's not his game. He's I was talking about him today with Dusty, and I want him to be modern day, his version of like modern day Andre Miller.
Yeah.
Be a floor general that just uses your strength, uses your assets to control the flow of the game. Like Dusty asked me like what I thought is like as far what would be a good, like not even like a settling, a good production line for him going forward. And I'm like, if at his peak, he is averaging 17 points, 9 assists, 5 rebounds on like 45, 37, 80. Like that's Andre Miller, Mike Conley. Like those are your really good organizers. That's a good outcome.
Yeah.
Like
no, you feel great about that. If that's the player that Scoot ends up being.
Everybody wants to put this like go be 25 and 10 John Morant. It's like that's not the style of player he is. And that's okay. Like he can be a very good player doing that if he's doing what we're seeing more recently. I think that's the interesting part. I want to go away from the players here because I thought this was a really interesting question. It sounds a little dark, but I think it's an interesting premise. This is from Jake in Rip City, Jake and Aussies. He says, how are you guys coping with the state the organization is in? And it gets into like a more of a personal thing. And I think you can attest to this with all the different guys you've covered over the years. He says the balance between players and people with lives and families and also assets that are best utilized when building a basketball team. I find it all conflicting to want a bad record and a high pick and want wins while juggling the trade 'em now versus the people side. you've been through 18 trade deadlines now?
Yeah.
Like and this is different. The last 2 deadlines specifically are much more different than a lot of the deadlines that have preceded it. How do you kind of look at things in this, as the team is kind of in this ubiquitous transitionary era, and how do you kind of manage that?
Well, I mean, I think first off, you just accept that like things are going to happen regardless. And no, so it's just like you just kind of, on one hand, I think when you've done this a long time, you just understand that like people come and go, and guys get traded, guys, flame out, guys retire, and so like on a personal level, you're just like you just kind of become accustomed to kind of the churn of the NBA. More specific though to this year or the last couple years at least, yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that everyone kind of knows what it is, I think helps quite a bit because, like I'm someone who like I like to see the team win. Obviously, I would love for them to get a good draft pick. That would be fantastic. But night to night basis, like to your point about being around them a lot, like they want to win. I want to see them win. And so for me, like that's never conflicting. Like I like it when they win. I never feel bad when they win. I completely understand when people would rather see them lose. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But just in someone in my position, like I just don't really view it that way. And as far as like the kind of the trade piece goes too, I mean, I think you also understand that like, do guys want to get traded? Yeah, maybe a few guys, but I don't think guys like necessarily want that. But they also understand the place that they're at in their careers, and they understand where the Blazers are at. And I think they understand the idea that like, hey, this is the kind of stuff that happens when you're on a team that is trying to build towards something going forward. So when the players know that, I think it also makes it like, okay, like fine. Like are guys like Jones going to get off this team? No, they're not. Are there guys who probably feel like, there are teams that are definitely closer to competing that they probably wouldn't mind? Yeah, I think so too. But I also don't think there's anyone on the team right now really that's like, I got to get out of here. Like, and if there was, if you really felt like there was like a real, like, man, I need to get off this team, I think that feels a certain way. And obviously you see it other places in the league right now. So like it obviously has, a twinge to it. But for me, it's like, I guess for me also, like I also approach trade deadline just like nothing's going to happen. And,
where the default position is that trades will not happen.
Dan, that's always what I say to you, man. I'm always like, me, like my number one assumption is that nothing's going to happen because that just feels like the most likely scenario. So
I want to say this, and it's going to sound like this condescending thing, but like it's not. It's just when you're around it all the time and you talk to people who are in the league all the time about these things, the amount of talk that takes place is insane. The amount of action that actually happens is so small. It's
that's a great point too. Just about like the way that you internalize it, particularly after a long time, is that you come to understand like 90% of this stuff is just people.
And it might be more than that.
Yeah. 90 is probably a low ball assessment. Yeah. And so like to that point too, it's like you see things online sometimes and you're like, you also just develop like a pretty good sense of like,
that ain't real.
What seems legitimate and what is like, not even like, I mean, like obviously the stuff that's like, come on, like that kind of stuff anyone can figure out for the most part. Yeah. There is a different level where it's like, no, like this just feels weird because like I recall like a specific conversation I had with a guy one time where like you harken back to something and you're like, someone who would know told me the exact opposite from this. And, things do change. Guys get stuff wrong sometimes.
Situations evolve, as it were.
Situations change, absolutely. Yeah. But for the most part, you kind of just, again, develop a callus, I would say, about like, I can kind of tell when something feels real and when something feels like it's like, this is just kind of feels like speculative. And, and sometimes those,
And it feels like there's been a few of those reporters that have kind of emerged in the power vacuum of Woj.
Yeah, well, exactly. And without Woj, like, yeah, we are definitely in a time of like
it's the Wild Wild West.
I don't and like you can't trust half the stuff that people put out there anymore anyways. Like so it's probably the worst time of the digital era for trade stuff because again, like you don't have you got Shams out there who obviously knows his stuff, but like that's just one guy. So you don't have the pivot to that guy. You don't have like the agent guy and the team guy. You just got the agent guy. And so like the
team guy doesn't exist anymore.
From one side, exactly. Yeah. Team guy was already kind of going away anyways because the agents are where you get the better stuff from. Fans generally are fans of players more
and
so
teams
than,
do
like,
this
than like the front office or the team. And so so like when you're like interacting with the guys, when you're getting edits, when you're trying to think of like what's a good topic, what's a good story to write, like
players like to talk,
you're gonna probably go more player side anyways at this point. And so like that also makes it feel a little bit different now. Like, and I guess the last thing I would say too, Dan, is that particularly now, like with the new CBA, like you just almost kind of assume deals aren't going to happen because it's like teams just seem like they're having a real hard time figuring out how to get some of this stuff done without getting to a point where they're like, hey, if this doesn't work, we don't have any options for like 3 years. So that makes it like
I want you to say this because I've said it and people are like, is there do you feel like there's genuine fear from front offices and hesitancy to make moves because of the ramifications of the CBA going forward over the next 2-3 years?
Absolutely. Like, and I'm not saying that for the Portland Trailblazers.
No, I'm saying like conversations around the league.
Conversations, like absolutely. Like you really get the sense that teams are like, again, like the deals that would have, I feel like, gotten done like 2 or 3 years ago, where a team is like, we feel like we're close, like let's just go for it. Like, I mean, Warriors for an example. Like, I feel like 3 years ago, Warriors would have been like, you know what, to hell with it, make the deal.
Yep. Now
it's like,
even if we wanted to, we can't.
Can we? Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, like that's different. Like. I feel like a lot like a team that feels like they're maybe like one guy away or like, just the idea that like, 3 years ago, if Jimmy Butler is available and you feel like you're like, hey man, like
we'll try.
Like for 1 year, heck, sure, why not? Like now it's like, that's going to hamstring us. Like, and so I feel like it's stuff like that to where it's like nowadays, teams are just really hesitant to do those things. And I think for good reason. Like, again, if it's like...
That CBA is punitive.
If this is not going to put us on a level where we feel like we are like bare minimum conference championship, then like they're not going to do the deal. And that's a pretty tough place to convince yourself that you're in, like... Because things go south, one guy gets injured, and then what happens then? So, I mean, I think to dust off an old chestnut, the deal flow just doesn't seem to be as like, it just doesn't, it's not as loose as it used to be. And so I think that's why you're seeing kind of a lot of these deals are like small deals around the edges because teams are just trying to figure out like, hey, like, do we have enough to get by the Celtics right now? And if we don't feel very confident that if we make that move, we're going to be able to get over the top of those guys, we're not going to do it. Like teams just aren't willing to take that chance nowadays because of how punitive the CBA is.
It's going to be a really interesting space to kind of see where that goes. A lot of people submitted trade questions and Casey knows that I'm going to say this. Guys, Casey's a team employee. He legally cannot discuss that stuff. Like, so I just want to get that out of the way. I will take some of these on their own later.
Dan, but you take them. I'll just
no. We're not going to take your time like that. I will take some of these on my own. So, but like he will actually get in trouble discussing them. So, like I'm not dismissing you guys the questions that you put in there, but No. So it's not that the team's telling Casey, no, we don't want you talking about it. Like, he actually cannot do it.
We're
like,
not supposed to. Yeah.
So
and I love hearing trade chatter stuff. Like, I think it's interesting. And then and again, like it keeps you sharp too, because like you're like, yeah, that sounds reasonable.
It's interesting when you start bouncing stuff around.
Yeah.
I think this is a more of a process question. I'm actually interested in what you think here. This is from Seth Klarman fan. Besides a franchise player, which role or roles do you think the Blazers need to have a more complete roster?
That is a good question.
Yeah, when I read that one, I had to kind of stop and think about like what I would prioritize there.
I mean, I think that
I'm going to ask you a specific thing. Do you think Denny is a big enough pain in the ass to be the pain in the ass that the team needs?
To be your red ass guy?
Yeah.
I don't.
He's right. To me, he's right on the edge.
Yeah. I think he's just a little too nice. I think probably for that. That is definitely
they need something.
Not an enforcer per se, but like that is an important guy to have on your team, both in terms of kind of the way you deal with other teams and the way you deal with the guys in your own locker room, and kind of
which Denny has shown more recently that he's
I think there's probably definitely some of that. And that can be tough for a new guy too. Even when there's a lot of other new guys, it's like, you gotta
work your way in,
build it first a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Outside of a franchise guy, I would say that I do think that they need to become a kind of a upper half top 10 team defensively. And so I think for me, it's like you need to have that lockdown guy defensively on the perimeter as well. And I think Donovan is going to be that guy in the paint. I think you need to have that.
You need two and one more.
Exactly. Well, and I think two will be that guy, but he's not yet. Yeah. So I would say that that guy who is just like the, your Tony Allens or your I would say Herb Jones, but Herb hasn't been doing it long enough to have that credit from me. But just one of those guys, a Drew Holiday guy, one of those guys who just makes his bones defensively and really is on the scouting report. It's like, God,
the Lou Dorts of the world.
Exactly.
I don't want to see this guy tonight.
Yeah, I think that for me is probably the most important thing after having that guy that's a verified, we know this guy can be the best player on the championship team. And so that for me is kind of where I go to. And I think part of that too is just because we're so accustomed to having been such a not great defensive team,
an offense forward team, and the identity of the team is switching.
So it's I just want to see it personally, I just want to know what that's like to have a guy out there where you're go get him, sick him.
And it feels like the organization has prioritized that with trading for Rob,
which I think they have
Donovan,
absolutely,
trading for two.
Again, I think Tumani is a guy who will get there, and is already kind of rounding it anyways. But I'd also like to see another guy, maybe more at the guard position.
Sure.
That is just a straight up I mentioned a Lou Dort is a really good example.
And Chauncey Billups, to his credit, despite what may or may not happen at the end of the year, has tried to instill that in Shaedon Sharpe by saying, hey, look, and I do want to give Chauncey some credit because we all know what the season is. He very easily could coast and not put any pressure on the young guys and just let things slide. And he's not. And he decided to go, you know what, Shea? You haven't had it, man. So you're going to take a step back.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to figure this out. And I think that kind of lends itself to that identity that you're talking about and organizationally what they're trying to get to. So,
and I've said this a couple times now. I'll say it again. I think it's great too that Chauncey talked about that stuff publicly. He could have just been we're gonna, we're bringing Denny back, we're bringing Jeremy back. We've liked the way those guys looked, so we're just gonna try that for a while, and Shaedon's gonna go to the bench. He could have done that.
Yeah,
but he actually talked about the reason why. Which I think also sends a message to the player.
And the rest of the players.
Yeah, and the rest of the players as well. I think you got to give him some credit for that because there's a lot of teams right now, a lot of coaches right now that are just like, I am not going to do that. Like, and particularly organizationally, like just the idea that like, what's going to happen if this guy gets mad, like how he's going to take this, like those are the kind of things now where I really feel like teams are struggling with that right now.
Across
like
the
whole
league.
Idea of like, yeah, and across the league about like, how do we let these guys know that they're important to us and that we have their best interests in mind while also being honest with them about some of the things that they need to improve upon without burning this relationship. And it feels like in the NBA, especially, and more so than any other pro sport, it feels like it takes almost nothing to get to that point now, where it's like, coach was tough on me for a couple weeks and I'm just done with it.
I'm out.
I don't want to deal with this anymore. Like that to me is like, it's such a toxic way to be a professional, let alone a professional athlete, that like it's
the AAU stuff, and
it's just not sustainable. And like, and so to bring it back around, like I think Chauncey, like just being like, hey, like we talked about this stuff, it didn't get to where I wanted it to, and now I only have so many buttons to push. I'm going to push that button.
And to Shaden's credit,
like
he's handling it the right way.
And he absolutely is. And, you know, to that point too, like, you know, Shaden is, I'm sure that some people would love for Shaden to be, you know, more gregarious or more talkative or whatever. But it's like, that's also the kind of personality that I think is going to take that coaching well. Yep. And so like, I really think you gotta give Chauncey credit for that. I think you got to give Shaden credit for that as well, to like take it in the manner in which it was meant to be taken. Like, and again, like, and that it just seems like nowadays, like, I just don't know how much that happens. And I also think too that like, you know, every team is looking for an advantage, and anytime they can be like, hey man, they're sending you to the bench. Jeez, boy, I mean, boy, I wouldn't do that.
Just stir that pot.
Yeah, exactly. Like I feel like that happens quite a bit.
Wouldn't happen to you here.
Yeah. So like, I think that you know there's a risk there, and
there certainly is.
I appreciate Chauncey taking that risk, I guess is what I'm saying.
Kind of stepping back to like 30,000 feet. Dusty and I were talking about this the other day, and I want to get your thoughts on this. It's a cross sport analogy. Looking, oh wow, there goes my voice. Looking at the NFL in the playoffs last week, almost every single coach that was left was a hard ass. And they were been around for a while in some form or facet. And it was interesting. We started like looking at it and like it stood out, the not just the culture, but the no tolerance for shenanigans across the board. Where a couple years ago, you remember where there was the quirky OC to head coach roles that like were happening around the league, and almost all those guys are gone. Like we're everybody's friend. You got to make sure you relate to the players, coaches. We've come back full circle. And now maybe it's a bad time to talk Danny Hurley after what happened last night. But who's the guy that's won back-to-back national titles? Is it the controlling psychopath, or is it the coach that relates to everybody? You know what I mean? I almost wonder if that's coming back to the NBA. Like
I hope so. And again, I don't think it should be the way it was before. Like
we don't need Bobby Knight.
Yeah, it should be more collaborative. Like it's better for everyone when it is more of a give and a take, and when your head coach isn't the dictator of your team. You know, like I don't think that's a good place to be either. But like to get the best out of players, like you got to be honest, and like if you want to be great, like you need to address the things that you're not so good at. And like those conversations are always going to be a little difficult. Like, and I think people are just averse to having those conversations because, you know, it can be hard. And so, you know, a coach that's willing to do that and to live with it, I think I think you got to have the right roster, but I think players and just adults respect that more.
Yeah.
You know, like I think at a certain point, like I think when you're younger, it's maybe more difficult to take that again in the way that it's intended. I think that's, you know, one of the,
Maturity matters.
In the NFL, like everyone almost always plays 4 years in college. So you come out, NBA, like half the league is one and done. Mm-hmm. So, you got guys who are younger coming into the league and
they've never been told no once in their life.
And particularly when it comes to basketball, like if you're a singular great player,
you can uplift
be a great team. Exactly. Like if you're a singular great football player, like
it helps.
Awesome. But like, but
it don't matter
without 5 other guys. Yeah. Exactly. And particularly on the other side, when like they're just playing defense, like those guys have a different approach to kind of their jobs than guys on the offensive side. And so like it seems to me like it's an environment where it's a little bit easier to like kind of get to those conversations where you're being honest and asking for things. And again, and like not being punitive, but just being like, hey, like we got to figure this out. And if we can't, we're going to have to make some changes and we still need you. Like you're still an important part of this team. Like you're incredibly important, but like there's got to be something else, like there's got to be a change made. So, I hope that we're getting there more in the NBA, and it does kind of feel like it's kind of going that direction a little bit. Like, I don't want anyone to take any kind of thing like, oh, NBA players are coddled or this or that. Like, that's not true. Like, I mean, obviously it's a great life, but like, they're out here working hard.
Yeah.
But I do think there is something to be said just about the idea of that, like, if you have trust in your organization, with your coaching staff, with your front office, it allows you to get to a place that I think, a lot of teams can't necessarily get to. And so, like, again, I'm not to mention them too, but like the Warriors were like that a few seasons ago, like when they were on their run, like with Steve Kerr, would like, I think it was there were some hard conversations that
guys could be MF'd up and down that entire roster.
Exactly. And, and you can do that when you have success and, like
hell, Pop made Tony Parker cry.
Yeah. I mean,
like,
yeah, and again, Pop too, like a guy who everyone talks about as being, maybe the one of the top 5 coaches in NBA history. Like, yeah, like you think that like there's a way. Phil Jackson again, like you can argue with some of the stuff he's said and done throughout the years. You can't argue with the results, and you can't argue with the fact that like he is being real with that team. Like the idea that like he is going to kind of edit himself in order to not offend somebody, that's no. Like, and again, I think and Spo too, like Eric Spoelstra, like when you think of all the coaches that you really think about as like the best coaches,
they're all the same box.
Exactly. They're, to your point, they're not kind of the new age, like, let's, talk about our feelings guys necessarily.
Look at Boston right now. Missoula's a lunatic.
Yeah, he's a nut. Yeah, exactly. Like
Kenny Atkinson got run out of Brooklyn because he was keeping Kyrie and KD in check and playing Jared Allen over their friend DeAndre Jordan. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know, guys, but there might be a pattern here to pull a string on.
And obviously winning, I think,
it cures a lot of ills.
Win and then do that. It makes it easier to respect it. But again, I also think too that like players in general, I think have a worldview generally that is based off of that. Like, I think they do appreciate that, I think guys generally want to be coached. They want to be given
guidance
and like honest, objective kind of opinions about kind of where they're at.
There's a lot of people that are telling them that they're the greatest and that everything's perfect and nothing you're doing is wrong.
It does feel like a lot of times kind of the around is the part. The bubble around you is where you kind of can start to get a little sideways.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the biggest problems across the NBA is being able to manage that and the voices that are in people's ears. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but there's one question here I wanted to get into. What do you think the most realistic and or best case scenarios for the development of the young guys like Scoot, Denny, Shea to Donovan? Like if you're looking at the final, 39 games now, what do you kind of hope to see from those guys down the stretch?
I hope that kind of a lot of what we've seen over the last, month of January, which is just like playing better basketball that doesn't necessarily always result in wins. Because, there's some benefits to that too. I think that kind of figuring out what your 7-8 man rotation is going to be next year, I think is starting to get kind of important. Mm-hmm. I do think that we're starting to reach the point in the build where it's like we need to lock some things down here a little bit. I think you got a pretty good sense at a couple positions. I think there's still some things to figure out at a few other positions. I think that I think you feel good about what you got going on at center. I think you feel pretty good about what you got going on at small forward. I think everything else is probably still a little bit up in the air right now. So I would like to see kind of that start to solidify a little bit. I think that would be helpful. I'd like to see a team that, again, is just like more competitive in games. And the other thing too, like if we could just get rid of the, like, we didn't look like we even had a chance in this 25-point loss games, like that for me alone would be enough. Partially because, like, it would just be nice to see professionally, but personally, man, like
we're beat.
Yeah, I don't like those are the ones where, like, I mean, you see me on press floor, where like I just start to get like
Casey may or may not occasionally yell from his seat.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and like those are the ones for me where it's like, and again, I think part of it too is that, like, I haven't been an employee of the team for so long, and like having known a lot of people in the arena too, it's like, man, we got to do better for these people, man. Like, I know we're gonna go through it sometimes. Like, we're not gonna win as much as anyone would like, but like
this process isn't fun.
And play some good, fun basketball and make it competitive. Like, you can lose, that's fine. Don't be out of the game to a team that is missing like 4 of their main rotation guys by the end of the first quarter. Like, those are the ones for me where it's like, if we can just get those games out.
Look, if you get dusted in the second half because the talent's not there, it happens.
Okay. Yeah. Like,
that's the NBA. That's
part of the growth.
Yeah.
Losing by 40 to a Utah Jazz team that doesn't have half of their team, like that's not part of the process. No. Like you don't gain anything from that. That wasn't a learning experience. That wasn't like you got to go through that. You don't have to go through that. You can absolutely avoid that and still become a very good team. So get rid of it. Like, get those games out of the system. Don't do that anymore.
Last one, I think another kind of a higher level question. Can you think of any points or stories of past NBA players? I think Blazers adjacent, like becoming the guy, like because you were there when Brandon goes drafted. Like, you were there obviously when Dame was drafted. That was when I first got around. What stood out? And like, kind of like the question here is the NBA players becoming the guy, and then what might be a nice allegory to the future Portland Trailblazers? Like, is there any correlations that you can see with like that ascendancy? There's another question in here where Scoot has said, and he said this publicly, that he's a leader, and the idea of him being a leader. How does he ascend to that? Like, what have you seen in the past that guys have been able to kind of take a hold of that? And whether it's for him or Shaden or Tu or Denny or Donovan, whoever it ends up being.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think so. The first part about like being the guy, I think one, like all of those guys you just mentioned have all been guys who have been a little bit older when they got to the league. So I think part of it, like one of the things about being the guy is I think like having some time either in college or in your first couple seasons in the NBA where you can kind of learn some things and kind of go through a little bit. And, we haven't had one of those like entering the league at 19 and then becoming the guys in Portland. And so like, like I think a lot of us are like, is Shaden going to be that guy? Is Scoot going to be that guy? Is Ant going to become that guy? Like, like we haven't seen that necessarily yet. And so I think one of the things about that is just being established enough to where you can step into that role because you've gone through some of those experiences. And I feel like as the league has trended younger, like that generally takes a little bit longer to do now. I mean, like I think a guy like SGA, where it's like, he was obviously has been a very good player. I would say it wasn't probably until like last year where I think you could probably say like, yeah, he's the guy, like you knew he was going to be their best player, but like from a leadership perspective, from like a understanding the requirements of being that guy on a team, like
which was his 6th year. He's 26 this year. He's 25
exactly.
last year.
Like, and so like that takes a little while to happen if you're not coming into the league after having played 4 years in college, which no one is anymore.
No. Well, except for two.
Except for two. Yeah, exactly. And then transferring.
There's a few of those guys. But
yeah, I mean, no, and I mean, very good players, but like those guys nowadays don't often become the guy because they all leave early.
Yes.
Like, I mean, I guess you could look at
Brandon was 3 years at UW.
Yeah, Ja was 2 at
Murray State. Yeah.
Yeah. So like he was, I think he's maybe like the youngest guy who's the guy like that, but also
because Luka came over as a child.
I mean, look what happened last year, like, and I think that's, again, like
the same we're seeing with Ant in Minnesota, like,
so
the youth is a problem.
Yeah. And I mean, even a guy like Luka, like obviously supremely talented. I don't know like a whole lot of the ins and outs of kind of the Mavs, but like, do you guys look to Luka?
Yes and no.
I mean, because
they looked to Dirk early on. Because remember, people tend to forget that Dirk was there early.
Look to Kyrie now, like, which I mean, that's not a bad thing, but like again, like to that point, like, it's just not always the best guy on your team. No. Like so
and there's the difference between the guy and the leader, because you were in those locker rooms when it was Dame, Wes, Nick, LaMarcus, Robin. Was Dame the guy from the jump? Was Dame the leader from the jump?
No. I mean, he was a leader, but
he wasn't the leader.
He wasn't the leader. No, I mean, it was LaMarcus and it was Wes, I would say as well. Yeah. Like, so, and I mean,
and again, Dame. But I know, but it was, it was Dame was a 4-year college guy.
Yeah.
Like even the 4-year college guy who at that point in time, I believe this still holds true, had run more pick and rolls than anybody in the history of college basketball, in major college basketball. I think he ran something like 10, he ran more than this, but like the tracking data had him like 10,000 plus pick and rolls in 4 years, which in college is just an obscene amount.
Yeah.
And you think about somebody like Scoot, who at 19 years old ran, maybe 1,000 in the Ignite at a level that wasn't nearly as refined or developed. As a reminder, Dame's college coach, Phil Beckner, is also his trainer. Yeah. So he bludgeoned him and beat him to death with that. So you have these moments, these opportunities for growth. But to your point, Casey, guys are coming, and I've talked to coaches about this, and I think it's pretty much universally held. They all understand, whether they're former players or not in the NBA. They all want guys to get paid, but they all wish that they stayed in school. Yeah, all of them do. To a man, they're all like, I don't want to coach kids. And I don't think it's a negative thing. It's because fundamentally, to our point about development earlier, there's just so many things you don't know. And we are officially becoming the old men talking about the young kids can't behave, but it's true. And there's so much more expectation. There's so much more money. There's so much more stuff that people have to deal with at a very young age. Like you said, what you were at 20 years old. If you gave my dumbass $10 million a year at 20 years old, I would have been in jail.
Yeah.
That's not even a question. I would have been a train wreck of a human being. Like, there's no way I would have been able to comprehend any level of accountability or responsibility. So when you see stuff pop up with young guys, it's not surprising, because you're really not supposed to have that at that age.
Yeah. A quick question too. Do you think that like NIL, how do you think that's going to affect guys in the league too? Because it also helpful. Seems now that like, hey, if it doesn't go well this year, I'll just go somewhere else. And and again, like, get paid, guys. Like, I think that's great. Get money.
Tristan Da Silva was a player at Colorado who came out in the draft, not this last year, but the year before. He came through Portland, and he was going to be a second-round pick. And them boys at Colorado said, hey, Tristan, come on back. We'll pay you. And guess what? He became the 18th pick to the Orlando Magic. Like, yeah. Go like Grant Nelson at Alabama. The guy with the wispy mustache. Yeah. Came back to Alabama. Got the bag. Like, Pope took over at Kentucky. Brought in nothing but 4- and 5-year players. And Kentucky's one of the better teams in the country. Because he's like, I've got NIL because all my kids went with Cal to Arkansas. Let's bring in some guys and just hoop. Like, yeah. And that's I think NIL is going to do a specifically for guys like two. Guys that like you're like, there's something there, but he should stay in school. And instead of getting the clock started, go make $3 million. Go like there and
go make 500,000 even, you know.
That's what I'm saying. Like, well, two's it. Like, no shots to you two. I love you. You're at Dayton. It's a good school, but you're not a powerhouse. But he's developed, and you look at what Dayton has put in the NBA recently. Like that's no joke. The same with Colorado. Colorado's a good basketball school. It's not the Big Ten. It's not the ACC. Hell, it's not the SEC, which might rule right now. Go back to school and develop. Dalton Knecht going from Northern Colorado to Tennessee turned him into nearly a lottery pick.
Yeah.
Kalel Ware didn't work out for him at Oregon. Goes to Indiana. Mike Woodson smacks him upside the head, gets him in line, and gets him drafted to a team that matters. You saw Ware just the other night in Miami. Is that the same guy you remember at Oregon? Like, had Ware gone in the draft a year early and not gone to Indiana and got it under control, he probably would have bounced out of the NBA or become another Nerlens Noel.
Yeah.
Where like, but growing, understanding, maturing, but also, hey man, look, I know that you've got family and friends and financially you're not probably as well off as you want to be. And you've got other friends that are in the league now talking about how they're living and how much money they have. Brother, you can go get good money and put yourself in such a better position. And yes, everybody wants to start the clock on their contracts because that's the big thing, particularly in the NFL because it's such a short earning window.
Yeah.
But that money in the NBA is guaranteed. Do you want to come in? And this is not a shot at two. He's just the second-round pick. Two's money at the 52nd overall pick versus Donovan's money at the number 7 overall pick. That's a chasm. You know, like that's a big, big deal. And Donovan goes back. Donovan could have come out last year. People thought he was going to come out even as a backup.
I thought he was going to.
Like, but he goes back because UConn, big-time basketball school, gave him the bag. Come back, develop.
They can make you maybe not whole, but they can at least
Alex Karaban.
Give you enough.
Alex Karaban was a guy who came in and worked out for the Blazers, and every single person was in that room said he didn't miss a shot. He just shot the living bejesus out of the ball. I was like, everybody I talked to in the draft world said he's probably into the first round. Probably into the first round. I'm like, and I had heard that there was maybe a team that had given him a first round promise, and then I heard UConn gave him a couple million. Do you want like $2 million to go play at UConn and probably improve your draft stock? Or do you want to maybe be a second round guy and get $980,000 in non-guaranteed years?
Go back and forth between the G League and maybe it just never turns out. Like, and also, you know, back to the CBA, like they'll cut you now too. Like,
oh, especially now.
There's no room. Like just because you got a rookie contract, it's like, yeah, they're valuable, but if we need that space, like, you got to go. Whereas before, it was like, that rarely happened. Now I feel like it's happened more and more as of late. I'm
genuinely wondering which rookie contracts in this next cycle don't get their options picked up. Like, as it gets tighter.
You got to assume with kind of last year's draft and it being what it was, that, like...
That's exactly what I mean.
There's going to be some guys.
There's going to be some casualties where you're like, maybe we should have taken a bigger swing here. Because I think a lot of teams went kind of chalky and went safe. Shouts to Detroit for going Ron Holland and surprising the entire NBA. Like, I think that's what you do in that draft. I think the Blazers did the same thing with Donovan. I think Zach Edey was the much more baseline level, like big, but Donovan's the guy you swing on. So I can see you're fading, brother. We're gonna get you out of here. So I got you right to an hour. Let everyone know where they can find you, the work you're doing, and where you'll be next.
Trailblazers.com, Blazers Balcony, Briefcase, wherever you get your podcasts, Briefcase. You can also see my stupid face on YouTube. Blazers Balcony, Brooke and I don't do it on video. Maybe someday we will. If you hate yourself, you can follow me on Twitter at Seahold. If you don't hate yourself as much, you can follow me on Instagram at Casey Holdahl.
You don't have nearly enough bird photos anymore.
Dude, I know, man. Well, so my hummingbirds have also there's too much competition in my neighborhood now.
Oh, man.
I don't my regular ones don't show up as often as they used to. And I think part of that is because I have a bunch of crows that live in my neighborhood now too, that are hanging out in my front yard a lot.
Running the neighborhood,
my front yard. And so I think they've run off the hummingbirds a little bit. To your point though, Dan, I have been thinking more, looking at my feed now, particularly on Instagram. It's this is too much Blazer stuff, man. This is not I'm a human person. I have interests well outside of just this job that I do and just basketball. So that's a good reminder, Dan. I need to.
We need more bird photos.
Open it back up again. Yeah, exactly. As I mentioned today, I did try to get a photo of an armadillo that I kicked when I was on my run today. But I was so freaked out that I was literally trying to get my phone out. I have a really blurry photo where you can kind of see the gray of its butt, but that's about it. But yeah, more that's about where you can find me. Go to trailblazers.com, read stuff on trailblazers.com, even though I don't write as much as I used to, but I probably will start doing it a little bit more here.
Do any of us?
No, because y'all don't read. Spend time the way you want to spend it.
I try.
Yeah.
So, Casey, I appreciate you. As always, folks, you can find me every day, Monday through Friday on 1080 AM The Fan, noon to 3 at my co-host, Dusty Hera, and then following every Trailblazers post game on K2 2.2-2 or 2.2 2-2, whatever it is, 2.2.
Yeah, I say 2.2. Yeah.
Officially, the Rip City Television Network now. It's made the changeover with Joe Simons, Tyree Smith, and myself. So, for everybody, we'll catch you all soon. Take care. Have a wonderful night for Casey. Thank you again for joining us.
No problem.
Take care. Talk soon. Bye.